Hello and welcome to Bad End episode 100. We've done it. We are here. It's our 100th
We made
episode. 2 out of 3 of us have made it, which is great. I am one half of those people, Josh Calixto, and then I have the other half, my other half, as it were, sitting right here, Kyle Cookstill. How's it
Hello.
going, Kyle?
It's hot. It's very, very, very hot.
It's very hot.
Very hot.
Hopefully that AC doesn't make too much noise.
Yeah.
For the sake
Apologize
of
in advance for the AC.
our 100th episode. But first of all, I want to just say thanks to everyone for tuning in. Thanks to everyone for chilling out and just following us along for this 100 episode journey. It's been a fun one. It's been great. Shouts out to all of those who have listened to us over the years. It's been a wild ride. You know, we started this as 3 people, me, Kyle, and Katie McCarthy, who now works at Apple, by the way. Fancy pants. Shouts out to Katie if she's out there listening to this podcast on the occasion of our 100th episode. We couldn't have done this without you, and losing you it sucked. It really did. But you know, we've undergone a lot of growth. We've seen a lot of things happen. The birth of super culture, which by the way is doing some awesome things too. We just launched a new podcast on that network, which you should check out. It's actually a new season of the Superculture Review called Idea of Evil. It's a Berserk podcast. It is about Kentaro Miura's acclaimed manga, Berserk. You should check that out. It is hosted by...
The manga, too. It's especially important to note. It's the manga, not the animated series, of which there are multiple. They're like going through the books.
Correct. So
Yeah.
if you've seen the anime, you'll still pretty much know what they're talking about. But it is specifically about the manga. We're trying to branch off a little bit more into non-game sort of discussion. This is kind of like our first dip into those waters. But yeah, shouts out to everyone part of the Superculture Network. Check them out. Check out Bullet Points, a great website about video games with some of the best games criticism you'll find on the internet these days. Shouts out to Heterotopias, another great publication which discusses the intersection between architecture and video games. Shouts out to Funland. Man, it's just like such a
crazy. I'm like,
great
so much good
lineup.
stuff.
Yeah, so much great stuff on this network. We hope you will check all of them out because they are all good friends of ours. They are all doing stuff that we believe in and that we think is good stuff. And we think that you will too if you are here listening to this podcast. So I consider these collabs to be some of the best things that we've done as a result of Bad End Podcast being a thing. And we hope that you will agree with us. So thank you all for joining us and thank you for being here on this journey. All that being said, during this episode, we are going to kind of recap, I guess, talk about some of the things that are going on in this podcast, talk about some of, our ideas for the future, some of the big topics that we've discussed. Alcohol, Kyle seems to be drinking a beer.
It's not beer.
Giving us our explicit tag on YouTube.
Stream is definitely not for children.
Don't you have to mark like alcohol consumption or something like that?
Oh my, really? It's
No,
not
I don't think you
alcohol,
do.
It's,
Demonetized.
root
It's Gatorade, bro. No, but yeah, we're going to talk about a few big things, some of the history of this show, some of our favorite moments, and we'll talk about some of like just our all-time faves type thing. I feel like that's something that we haven't really done on this show before, and I think is actually really appropriate because on Twitter, whenever I partake in the old Twitter discourse, that's like one of the
isn't often anymore. You're not very active on Twitter.
Dude, I feel like discourse in general is not super active on. I feel like maybe it was COVID, I don't know, but everyone just kind of got I don't want to say tired of the discourse, but like the amount of shit that I have to keep up with on a daily basis seems to have reduced by a fairly significant amount over COVID.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I feel like part of that is like a big change in our media environment, which is indicative in some ways of good things and in some ways of bad things. And I want us to talk about that a little bit later in the episode. But I want to first kick off by discussing just our top 5 favorite games each.
Oh, right now.
So it'll
just
be
getting into it.
Yeah, well, unless you have something else that you want to cover.
It.
I mean,
no.
We can get sentimental about things.
Maybe we can use our top 5 games to talk about moments on Bad End. I think it is also important if you are just tuning in for number 100. This is not a normal episode necessarily. This is one for the fans.
It's for the fans.
If you've been around.
Well, I mean, it's sort of. I mean, I think we'll also have. It's not like we're just
everyone.
No, I mean, I think that
fans.
We're going to talk about some of. Honestly, if anything, you can look at it. This is kind of like a recap of the last, basically, 4 years.
Whew.
Of
4 years
gaming. I guess history almost.
Yeah.
Because I want to talk a bit about how things have changed since we started recording this podcast, which, you know, you go back and listen to some of our earlier episodes and like the discussions that we're having at that time are so much different. Like, I think we spend like an entire second half of an episode discussing an Ian Bogost article, which is like such a 2017 thing, you know? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I do.
But I want to start out with talking about our favorite games, just because I do feel like that does help to put our kind of our line in the sand of where we stand taste wise, which is some context that I think people have trouble with, because the way that we talk about games and the way we criticize games is sometimes like devoid of context, right? Which we don't really realize because we talk to each other every couple weeks and more. But people who are just listening to the show for the first time or the second time, or people who have been listening to us for a long time, might have no clue like why we think some of the things that we think, and maybe using this opportunity to kind of like describe our taste and things that we like about this game, or things that we like about games that are kind of specific to Bad End, I think is a kind of good opportunity here.
That sounds good.
All right, so I will start with mine because I have video prepared for that.
Ooh.
Yeah. Oh, I gotta mute it. Okay, it's muted. Okay. Oh, by the way, this is on YouTube. So if you're listening to this podcast via the audio channels, Kyle, prep your video quick. Oh, I'll prep it while we're talking about, you know, the game or whatever. We'll figure it out. Oh God. Maybe I'm not as prepared for this as I think. Anyway, we'll figure it out. Yes, this is on YouTube. We are live streaming this to our premium Patreon subscribers. You can go support us there, patreon.com/badend, if you want to be able to join us live for these things. But this, if you're listening to this on Spotify or Simplecast or iTunes or what have you, you can go check this out on YouTube as well if you have video. I've noticed like that's another thing that's kind of changed during our time with this podcast, is that like a lot of people will watch videos instead of listening to podcasts, even if it's like basically a video podcast, you know, as long as there's like people talking, it's like a different thing entirely almost. So now that's an option for y'all. So if you prefer to watch us in full motion video YouTube form, go do that. You can basically just search Bad End Podcast on YouTube and you'll find our podcasts there. I tried it for the last one. You'll see our peach colored kind of logo there, our background. Anyway, without further ado, Kyle and I's top favorite games. Top 10. Bad End top 10 of all time. Okay. Number 1
You should start it with the trailer. Just bring it up first. Bring it up and then talk about it. Give it a little set. Like the
Oh, this
fans are
is
gonna
like
start
basically
cheering.
a spoiler already right here.
There you go. Oh, what's it
Okay.
gonna be?
Oh, we got Cloud, Square Enix,
Square
Disney
Enix and Disney.
Interactive
What
Studio.
is this?
Well, Kingdom
Could this
Hearts.
be a merging of my favorite two franchises, Final Fantasy and Disney?
Yeah. So one of my favorite games. I mean, I chose these 5 not necessarily based on like whether I think they're the best games. Obviously, it's like kind of formative favorite types of games. This one is one that it was like my favorite game for a long time when I was a kid, especially like all middle school. I want to say like most of high school. It was like easily Kingdom Hearts. And the reason for that is because I feel like it kind of video games have this, they've been around for such a long time now that they are these artifacts that kind of follow you throughout your life and sometimes could have this effect of, signaling your own transformation as a person. And this one was kind of like a coming of age video game for me. It's about like kind of handing the baton from childhood, adolescence to this kind of like budding mystery of being like a teenager almost. You have these other people in your life and it feels like you're kind of moving from one universe to another and they're kind of disconnected, but you're trying to find pathways that connect them. And that's one thing that I think to me still persists about this game is that it still is very effective at that. From the Utada, extremely evocative Utada Hikaru song, Simple and Clean, one of the best from them. What a great song, great game. But it helped to, quote, shape me as a gamer. And I think it's important that we realize that there is this like deeply personal element to video games and how they affect us. And I think that helps when it comes to any kind of critical mindset, right? Like you have to take into account the fact that there is a very personal aspect to this stuff. And this is the one that I would like leave off of my best games of all times list. I kind of included this intentionally as a statement that like it's not all about like the quality of the game necessarily, but that we do have these very personal relationships to our games and where they hit us in our lives. And I feel like a lot of other people who play games would kind of agree with me on this one. I think Kingdom Hearts is a stand-in for that fact, and it's kind of the example that proves the point that like games, even if it's not quote the best quality, if it's not like the best designed JRPG of all time or what have you, it has that power, it has that effect. So that's my Kingdom Hearts love right there.
I think what's interesting about us talking about like you brought up a good point when you were starting to talk about like not the best games but our favorite games, which I think is an important distinction, because I think that if I was to like come up with what I thought the best games were, I think that would be a list of games that I don't even know if I necessarily like, but games that I would say this is objectively like a really good game. I think you actually have a game on your list that I think is like it's maybe like one of the best games, but it's not necessarily a game that I like. I think that's interesting, and I think that's sort of a theme I think with most of our lists maybe is this idea that like I think what makes a game really stand out isn't like it being the best. I think it has to do a lot with like the context in which you play it and where you were at when it happens. And something like Kingdom Hearts, obviously, if you're like, if you're like the right age and time for that thing to come out, that's like a tactical neural fucking bomb of like perfect like preteen angst / optimism and like childhood ending. And yeah, it's a good one.
I feel like your first game is kind of in that vein as well.
I think before you show my first game, I will say I feel like something that hit me. Actually, no. You can go ahead Run the tape. Run the tape. Oh,
That's a
rated E for
long rated E
everyone.
for everyone.
It's Chibi Robo. It's not Chibi Robo. This is Animal Crossing. I don't think there's really one specifically that I really enjoy. Obviously, the GameCube one was a big deal because it was the first one that I played. But I think there is like a little bit of Kingdom Heartsiness to this, where when this game sort of hit me in my life, I was in, I guess whatever, I don't know, I was in high school, but I wasn't like about to graduate. I think I maybe like my freshman or sophomore year of high school. Um, and I don't know. I don't even know. Like it's weird now because of New Horizons. The Animal Crossing is like a much bigger game. And it was still like big when it came out, but like Animal Crossing was not a thing. I think even unlike something like Kingdom Hearts, where Kingdom Hearts is like everyone plays Kingdom Hearts. If you have a PlayStation, you're probably playing Kingdom Hearts. Um, Animal Crossing is like not that game, especially at the time for the GameCube to come out. And so it was this very weird thing where I didn't have like a ton of friends growing up who played games as much as I did. And Animal Crossing was this weird thing where I knew like a few people who played it, and we were like best buds, and we would like play Animal Crossing together because it was this weird sort of secret thing. So I think what was interesting about Animal Crossing is that instead of like being this weird bridge between childhood and adulthood, because it also doesn't really try to be that necessarily. Although in the newer games, you have like, I don't know, there's like more sort of real life ish stuff. Playing Animal Crossing now is almost like a way to sort of um, go back to childhood a little bit and enjoy sort of like a simpler time, both from the like aesthetics of the game, because the game is sort of it's like a simple understanding of the world and how it works, which maps really well to being a kid and just sort of thinking that's the way the world works. So stepping back into that is I don't know, it feels like really nice. And it's also still like as of yet no one else is doing it really as well. There's been like a few games that have like tried, like I mean, like something like Stardew Valley is definitely pulling a lot from like Harvest Moon and Animal Crossing, but even then other games that have attempted to be sort of direct rips just don't come close. And I think that even now, just something about this, the charm of this game is like it's just sort of impossibly optimistic and just nice. And even as I'm talking about it now, I'm like, I should go back and play some more New Horizons because it's been a minute.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it's also, on the other hand, and I think this is an important thing to start discussing here too, is that like it's also important that you, as like an adult, are able to kind of separate that feeling of how the art made you feel at a certain time
Yeah.
versus like how it might come off to other people, how it ages, how whether or not it has like that kind of timeless or like universal appeal. Basically to kind of like peel back the layers of like, okay, what do I like about this game and why do I like it? For like, why do those reasons kind of factor into my own, how do my own personal biases essentially factor into why I like this game? And I think that probably applies more to Kingdom Hearts than it does to Animal Crossing, because I think Animal Crossing, as COVID kind of showed, does have a lot of universal appeal, which I think is part of why that game is so great and why it has, the concept itself has aged so well. But I think it's important to kind of be able to step back and say like, you know, this was from a period of my life where it had a larger impact on me than it may have if I was like of a different age. And to just kind of like recognize your own personal biases and to be able to better hear other people and where they're coming from when they talk about video games. And that's especially important, I think, when you are trying to partake in the culture of video games. And I think it's something that a lot of people take issue with, is like the fact that they have to realize their own biases and like where they're coming at things from, and to like reckon with their darlings. That's not to say that like Kingdom Hearts is a shitty game. I'm just, And I think it's okay to kind of make the argument that like this game does have appeal to people who like lived a certain experience. I think that's like a discussion that I don't think anyone would really take issue with. But it's about the context in which you're having these conversations, and I think that's why these two games have like a very distinct position on this list. Yeah, God, I haven't say a couple more things about Animal Crossing before I bring up.
I could talk forever about Animal Crossing. I think the one thing difference between Animal Crossing and Kingdom Hearts is that, Kingdom Hearts is not on my list. However, I think one thing is still unique is sort of what I brought up near the end of the talking about Animal Crossing was that Kingdom Hearts is still like very much a JRPG. Like it's not. There's still like stuff that sort of makes Kingdom Hearts, but at its core, its sort of formula is very recognizable to anyone who's played a JRPG. And I think that something like Animal Crossing for me really stands out because that formula is just like you only get it with Animal Crossing. It's almost like something like Katamari or whatever, where you're only ever playing Katamari if you're playing Katamari. I think that's why other Animal Crossing games don't really work. They don't feel like they work as much, is because you're not playing Animal Crossing. You're playing some other thing that has people and characters that you don't care about, or they don't put like the right amount of life into them or something. So it doesn't like it feels like if you're not playing Animal Crossing, you're not like playing Animal Crossing, which sounds silly, but I think there's a way where you can like play other games and still have the same feeling of playing something like Kingdom Hearts, but the specific thematic wrapping is what makes it be so potent.
Yeah,
for 90s kids.
Combining Disney plus Kingdom Hearts was just, to this day, it sounds absurd. Like it's nuts that they would do such a thing. I just
imagine it has to come up like every single meeting. They're looking at the line items being like, are we sure about this one still?
Like, man, I can't believe we're doing this, guys.
This is like Disney, who owns like Star Wars now. It's like, yeah.
Yusuf says, TBH, best thing about Animal Crossing is that Sean Wasabi track. Which Sean Wasabi?
I don't even know if there's a Sean Wasabi track.
Me either. You might have to.
Maybe it was in the commercial.
Oh, was Sean Wasabi even alive when that commercial came out? Anyway, next game.
Ooh,
rated
17 plus.
M.
Josh is an adult now.
This is
10
over
out of
200 awards. There's 200 publications at this time.
Yeah. It's one publication gave it 200 awards.
CD Projekt Red presents
Cyberpunk 2077.
That's like when this is probably came out the same year as the first trailer for that game. Yeah, The Witcher 3 is the second on my list. Man, this is one. I feel like this has the potential to fall off the list. Like,
yeah,
it's hanging by a thread, which is nuts because
like these people in the video who are hanging from
literally
from a tree.
It's showing images of people hanging from trees, which is nuts to me because this was kind of like the unimpeachable, I think, in my opinion, best game ever for a while. I don't know what the hell happened. Am I getting old or what? I'm definitely getting old, but don't answer that. But basically, the reason why The Witcher was so appealing to me is because like it did what so many other games did that I enjoyed playing, right? Which is like Dragon Age, Mass Effect, all these games had this like, fun combat system where you could like talk to people and there was cool character building and you could make decisions. Had this lineage like all the way back to Fable and then even before that, like the classic RPGs of yore. But The Witcher had like writing that felt like it was even on another level than that. Like the characters just felt so fleshed out. It felt mature in really weird ways where like not every single thread had to be neatly tied up, which at the time was like kinda revolutionary for a video game. It didn't sound like if someone's like listening to you play a game, like they automatically know it's a video game. They're not thinking like, oh, is that what show are you watching? It's never that.
What
Like
prestige television series are you
yeah,
watching right now?
this felt like it was like Game of Thrones, but like potentially better. Like depending on what scene you were kind of listening to, and some of like the absolute variety of the missions and stuff in this game is just bonkers. Like it wasn't just an open world game in the sense that like you had a lot of places to go. It's that there was like so much to see and so much to do and so many experiences that were capable of surprising you as a player that I think it still stands out to me. I feel like these days there's a lot of games that do a lot of these things better than The Witcher did, even though The Witcher 3 still kind of did all of those things in one place, maybe better than a lot of those other games did, especially if you take into account like Hearts of Stone, the first expansion, which is like, to me, like even better than the base game, just because it's like 9 hours of just like straight good. It's like the best things about The Witcher. Great characters, great, variety of what you're doing. And yeah, that's why The Witcher is still on this list for me, because it did those things when others were not, and it's still maybe one of the best collections of like these new things that is out there, even though a lot of games have done things better. Like we're going to talk about a game that like blows the writing of The Witcher 3 out of the water. There's games that have like introduced way more variety than The Witcher. Another one of those is on this list as well. But The Witcher still does like kind of all of them in one place, maybe better than the others.
I think The Witcher 3 especially feels like if we were to talk about best games and not favorite games, The Witcher 3 is like the best version of like 2010s games. It's one of these games where like everything that everyone was working with, like even people like Ubisoft and stuff, like The Witcher just like does it and does it better. It's got like all sorts of like points of interest and people to talk to and stories, and like actually has like good combat and like an interesting like theme and stuff, and like actually like compelling main character. And so yeah, I would agree with you that like if someone was to be like, what is the game that most epitomizes what people were playing in 2010s, it'd be like, oh yeah, well The Witcher 3 is obviously like that's the one. Oh, you got some Demon Slayer right there on the water bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Getting them. Did you play The Witcher 2?
Yes, I did.
What did you think about it compared to 3?
I mean, I played it before The Witcher 3 came out. So like I played it in its time, which I think also mattered a lot, like where the writing was also great there.
That game felt fucking profound when it came out. Like The Witcher 3 for me, The Witcher 3 is great. Something about 2 though is like when 2 came out, it was like, whoa.
It was underrated
like,
too. It was like so severely underrated.
No one talks about it because The Witcher 1 like was so bad that The Witcher 2 got sort of like overlooked in this weird way. And I played it and was like, this game is fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Like nothing else came close.
It kind of was like Fable to me. Like it felt like a mature version of Fable.
Yeah.
And like everything that I had like wished Fable would be, even though in a lot of senses like Fable is still so fun to me. When I think back on it, I'm like, God, that's such a just fun. It's like it's just like the fun loops of an RPG. And what makes
without any of the commitment,
without any of like the BS, it's like you got the hearts over people's head, and it's like just the most simple version of that. It is like Fable is to The Witcher what like Mario is to Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time.
Sure.
Where it's like Sands of Time adds so much more complexity and mechanics and maturity in scare quotes, but Mario is like the pared down like really fun thing that like you kind of are always thinking about at the back of your mind, even though like the Sands of Time is still like appealing to you as like an
Yeah.
older, person playing the game. Um, yeah, that's a really good point about Witcher 3, though. I definitely agree.
Yeah, because it felt like it didn't feel like the sort of, it was like obviously amazing and it's a great game, but it didn't feel like the sort of revolution or revelation that Witcher 2 did, in part because it was like, oh, this is like all these other games, they just fucking did it. Like
Right.
they're which is fine, and it's still like a great game. Um yeah.
Kyle, the next game you're going to talk about, what's the suffix or for it?
The suffix,
Or the what entry
the
is it?
the number.
Yeah.
I'll send you a link
Oh
eroni.
god, it's so hard for me to pull this up. Don't send me anything. It's hard for me to pull this up with all. Sorry,
Okay.
technical difficulties. I have like 10 screens. It's very difficult.
Can I DM you the number?
Sure, sure. It's a number. Okay, okay. Okay, we're good. We're good. I'm bringing it up.
All right. This is great audio. Here we go. Oh man, the fastest selling Anno game ever. I didn't know that. Look at that. It's
Exclusive.
back with exclusive new content and
Oh,
features.
this is like a
Oh, is this the same thing?
yeah. I mean, maybe it's like a remake or something. Just like a
Oh, maybe like a console version. Anyways, this game is Anno 1800.
DLC one.
I have man, I've gushed about this game a little bit on this podcast. Not a lot because we're not a strategy games podcast, so I understand that not a lot of people really care. I, however, really love strategy games. There's a part of me that does not get to shine its brightest light on Bad End Podcast, which I am okay with. However, I will say that on this podcast now, we're doing top 5 games. I feel like Anno 1800 is one of my top 5. I think this is both one of my favorite games and I think is one of the best games. Um,
Wow.
it's like,
State your case.
it's, oh man. The thing about this game is that it's beautiful for one. So we're looking at
Yeah, you
this
can
video
tell.
right now. On this video, the game is gorgeous. And the other thing is that the game is gorgeous without a compromise. So I think a lot of times, so for those of you who don't know and aren't watching this video, Anno 1800 is like, it's an Anno game, which might mean or not mean anything to you, but effectively what you do is that you're building like a sort of colony settlement empire-esque thing on islands that have resources, and you're like making stuff sort of like it's like a city builder that's a little more economic with like production chains and stuff. um, and oftentimes, like when you get games that are systemically deep, their aesthetics will suffer for that. They'll like, because like the game is really complicated to maintain. Oftentimes too, like strategy games don't have huge budgets, so you get stuff that's sort of like pared down. Or you get a game that's like very pretty, and because like all of the time went into like the look of it and stuff, the systems themselves are not like deep, or that just because of the way the UI has to work for this like simple game means that you can't do very complicated stuff. Like Anno 1800 just fucking does both of these things. And it is like spectacular. It is both like I think it is the best looking city builder game I've ever played, but it is like incredibly deep in terms of its systems, and also the
This
systems
just looks
are
like a
good.
painting, dude.
It's beautiful. That's what it looks like. And I think that the thing about this game is that it's easy to see screenshots of it and videos playing it where it's like, oh, well, you probably just like start with that, or you can't like interact with that. And the thing about this game is that all those things that you see in screenshots are actually like placed by players, someone playing it. So all that stuff, you basically start with nothing, and then over time you're like building up your uh, empire effectively. And it's just like, it is so good. It's like it almost similar to like uh the sort of Mario Prince of Persia esque dichotomy, or like the sort of light version of a heavy systems thing. I think what Anno does, it is very deep, but it also takes a lot of the sort of tenets of city building and sort of boils them a little bit and says like, what's really important here? Like what really matters? And like what really matters isn't like laying pipe to like figure out where water goes and like dealing with sewage. Like that sort of, those systems sound really cool in theory, and then you do them in practice and they're often very easy and solvable, and you do them once and never think about it again. It's not like a compelling challenge. And so what Anno does is that it like just takes all this stuff and really focuses on this notion of production. But then also it literalizes all that stuff in terms of things that are on the map. So you're like, if you want to build shirts, you have to like build a sheep farm, and then you get to build the little sheep pens, and then you have to build like a sewing factory. And then for a shirt to happen, someone will move from that sheep factory over to the clothing factory and make a shirt. And then the person who makes a shirt has to take that shirt to like a warehouse, which can then be accessed anywhere on your island. And it's like, it's the thing about it is that, so there's like, it both works at that scale where you're like very, very, very simple, small production chains. However, the game itself, the map of the game, are there's multiple islands, and each island has its own sort of special resources. And so you're doing this thing where you're sort of doing your little production chains inside your own town on one island. And then you realize that you need a resource that's only available on another island. And so then you have to set up a trading, like a supply line network between those two islands. And then what happens is that, so you do that, and then you're like, basically you're sort of dominating the map and you're trading with everyone. And then the game is like, oh, by the way, there's a whole nother map that has more islands on it. So then you're running ships between effectively like two sides of the world. There's like the New World, and then there's like Europe. And there's actually another map, which is like Africa, which is like, it's very weird. There are some very problematic things about Anno 1800, I will say. Very strange things. But
what do people do for the shirts before then?
You do start with some shirts. So you only need more shirts if you have more people. Or they just run around naked, you know. Yeah. But so the thing that this game does that I've never seen another strategy game do, and really like any game as well, we actually talk about this a lot on Bad End, is like a lot of times like the proposition for like you know, your whatever AAA first person game, third person action adventure is like, hey, I know you liked doing this activity for 10 minutes. Do you want to do this activity for 40 hours? And you're like, I don't know. And like, it doesn't fundamentally change. And what Anno does is that the scope of what you're working with continues to get bigger in this sort of like concentric circle model, where you go from like really caring about very specific small things, and over time you're starting to care more and more about a larger and larger scope of what you're actually dealing with. And then you can sort of leave some of the minutia to other people. You can't like automate it. You do still need to like go and build buildings and stuff, but it's got this specific sort of growing sense of scale that feels like totally unique to any game I've ever played before, even outside of strategy games. Like this notion of doing this sort of simple activities at a larger and larger and larger scale, and how the systems themselves both kind of mirror each other at micro and macro levels, where the systems that you use to connect islands together is very similar to the systems that you use to like connect sheep to shirt factories or whatever. So, oh, it's so good. It's just like, and the other thing too, I will say, and this is like very not typical Bad End stuff, because I don't usually give a fuck about this. But one thing that is really nice about Anno is that the developers of this game seem to truly understand what the players of the game want. Which I think when you get some stuff like this, it can be sort of a crapshoot where the developers are like, oh, we want this thing, and players don't want this thing. Every fucking DLC that comes out for Anno, I'm like, I want that. Well, you're going to give me an amusement park DLC? I can build amusement parks. I can like build a museum with cool like animal exhibits. I can like do all this other stuff.
I want to address
like
something.
Also super nice.
I want to step in here and take a chance.
Step in.
Okay, you bring up that, you know, the developer, quote, knowing what we want is like not something that we, quote, care about on this podcast. And it's like, sure, to an extent, but like, I just feel like that's not, at its core, it's not like it's a bad thing to want, right?
I think that it's very easy to talk about that and then be a slippery slope to like entitlement.
Yes, I agree.
I
But
think
I
that's
think
what's the hard
that's
part about
I
it.
think the message of like, yeah, of course there's things that people want out of a game that, for whatever reason, like, sometimes there's shit that's just like really fucking hard to do, and that's why it has never been done before. You know?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I would like Mass Effect to have a billion different storylines, and then that would make it a better game, maybe. But it's like, also, it's kind of unrealistic to expect that is just, it's kind of ridiculous, right? But then
Yeah.
there's like the things that like people could do that they just kind of haven't because the focus groups have been like, oh, I'm okay with it being this cheaper way or whatever. And that stuff, when you finally see that kind of thing come to fruition and at like not a super, super great cost, it's like it can be a revelation, like to see something like Anno where it's like you look at the game and you're like, wow, this is like everything I wanted out of this type of game. And it doesn't look like it took significantly more time or resources to make than, say, SimCity, the latest edition of SimCity or Civilization or what have you.
It's like it's what the crazy thing is that like so everyone knows. I don't know.
You just need to have these conversations with nuance is the whole thing.
Yeah.
I don't like that's like one of the things that I want to kind of cover later in this show is that like we talk a lot of shit about like the conversations and discourses that happen that at their core are not bad conversations to be having. It's just that the terms of those conversations over the past 4 years since we started this podcast have not done much changing and have not like evolved in ways that actually help the situation. And a part of that is okay, we'll get to this stuff later, but you get what I'm saying here, which is that when you see a game like this that like does things that quote you want or like quote gamers want, it's like it feels kind of gross to say that because the concept of like a developer doing what a gamer wants has become perverted by the fact that gamers have been kind of entitled pricks on the whole, especially in like, I mean, I don't want to say especially in recent history because it's been around for a while now, but all of this is to say it's not bad to like want something from a game and like enjoy a game because it gives you that,
I think what's like the most damning thing about what you're talking about is that I think that everyone recognizes everyone who's like played Anno at all and is generally into this type of strategy game sort of recognizes that Anno 1800 is like the best. And like what that translates to is basically like no discussion. Like very little people, like no one's getting mad about it. That's like basically the biggest praise a game can get is that people aren't mad now. Like even on places like I don't know, just like general like strategy game boards and stuff that often will like whine and bitch about like every game. Like Anno 1800's success is marked by the fact that no one is talking about it, which is like so sad. It's like this game is like wonderful and perfect and everyone's enjoying it, but like no one is talking about it.
Is there also like an element of this which is like the more complex something is, right? The more complex something systems are, or the more like quote elegant something systems are, the more it feels like you're being kind of a douchebag when you talk about it. Or you gush about it.
These are circles where people will talk about this stuff, and it's these types of circles. The people that like to shit on stuff like to shit on it from the perspective of being like, I've internalized your complex system and am smart enough to know that it's bad, and that's like a sort of point of gloating. What's so weird about this is that I don't think Anno 1800 is like incredibly complicated. It's definitely like it's a strategy game and it is difficult in some ways, but it's like no one's complaining about it, which seems to be the main way that people talk about games now. There's not like, it's either like you have someone on Reddit who's like, look, my boyfriend or whatever made me, or like my girlfriend made me this like cross stitch of my game. Or it's like, this developer didn't say they were going to do their thing. Like there's no there's no way that like we know how to praise games now. Outside, I guess maybe like the fucking Steam reviews or something. But it's just so weird to see a game that all of signs point to it being very, very, very positively received inside its community, and what that translates to is effectively silence, which is just crazy. It's crazy.
I'm just saying, like, there's an extent to which quality hinges on, some level of complexity or nuanced being afforded by the systems within a game. I think of, like, the example I think of off the top of my head is Dota 2, where it's like the most complex MOBA, and nobody wants to fucking hear someone talk about how Dota 2 is the best game.
Yeah.
And it's like as a result, it's like the people who play Dota 2 will talk about how much they love Dota 2 with their friends, but like it's been such a long time now that everyone's kind of tired of hearing about how Dota 2 is the best MOBA,
Yeah.
And I
think
think
there's probably a similar thread
like
there.
like Magic the Gathering is like that kind of game, and like you hear a lot about Magic the Gathering, but also it's just like it's annoying to be that guy now.
Who likes Magic. It's like you talking
no
about
it's not just who likes
League.
it, but who's like extremely vocal about it being the best, the unequivocally best thing.
Sure.
And like everything else is just like a shitty copy of it.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
So someone in our chat says I like Magic and Dota. Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with liking Magic and Dota.
I would assume most of our friends do. I automatically assume like anyone I hang out with is like a Dota person, and I'm like the pleb who plays League. Okay, next game perhaps.
Next game.
Okay, great content here. Pulling up the oh yeah, here we go, baby. Disco Elysium. It's the game so great we made a whole podcast about it. It's the best. It's best writing in a game. Truly different from anything we'd ever seen before. I mean, we've already gushed about this one enough on this podcast. I feel.
Go listen to our 12-hour podcast about how great this game is.
Yeah, 2019 Game of the Year episode. We talked about this at length.
This is one of the games that everyone's tired of hearing people say how good it is. Like, I'm now like, was it really that good? I feel like it's time for me to go back and play it.
It really was.
It was that good, yeah.
But also, like, it sucks that it's that now, because it's at the point where it's like, I played it and it's not the best thing that I've ever played. Type thing.
It's like full circle.
It's its reputation precedes itself. Hello. Sorry, I was saying hello to someone in our chat. Welcome to our 100th episode celebrations. And yeah, I mean, if you want to hear us gush more about Disco Elysium, listen to our Disco Elysium podcast, which is called Savoir Faire. It's season 1 of the Superculture Review, available wherever podcasts are sold and
I
distributed.
think the only thing that sucks about Disco Elysium is some of the merch. What are they doing? What are they doing?
Some of these games are just like very clear. Like, yeah,
Disco Elysium is like,
it's on the list,
Man, I feel like that's just one of these games where, talking about like hitting you sort of in the right time in your life, like I think that you get past a certain age and you just sort of expect nothing's gonna hit me like that anymore. And then like Disco Elysium, I was like, damn, like this is like media for me when I need it. Going back again to a conversation we've had a lot about the notion of like adult or like mature games, and not like there's like blood and boobs or something, but that the game itself is dealing with interesting themes and ideas. And Disco Elysium, I think, is a great example of that. Like I think it was Reed on the podcast made the point to say that like if Disco Elysium is about anything, it's about the failure of like almost any ideology. which is like, if you were to pitch someone that for a video game, no one's gonna make that. Like that sounds ridiculous. And then like that doesn't fit with like a hero narrative. There's no like power ups you can associate with that. Um, so I just think that, I mean, it's like one of the best books I've recently read. You know,
Yeah, it's like a
fucking
book.
great.
It's like a book, but it's definitely a game too.
It's like a book, but definitely a game.
I mean, it's like the high watermark. You know, obviously it's not. You're not gonna get a Disco Elysium like every day, but
Yeah,
it does kind of pave the way forward for what kind of games are capable of, in my opinion.
well, and also people are already making games that use a similar dialogue system as Disco Elysium. So maybe it's changed the water. Also, someone in chat called out that the end of the game sucks. I do agree. The end of the game is very bad. It's like, I think they just had to end it.
No, they said the
That's sort of what it felt like.
Oh wait, sorry.
I wasn't gonna say
spoiler.
That. Yeah.
I'll delete. I will delete.
But the end of the game, like after sort of the end of the game, there's like a very clear part of that's like the end right before credits, and you're like talking to everyone. That part was like, I don't know. It was like stupid, but like very much Disco Elysium is about the journey, not the end. So I was like, whatever.
Yeah.
Bleep it. Yeah.
Okay.
You want to pull my next one? Yeah. Pull it up. Uh-oh.
May contain content inappropriate for children.
This stream is not for children. Some little Sparks. Namco Bandai. Uh-huh. What's it gonna be?
Let's go. Just say it, Kyle.
Dark Souls.
We got podcast listeners to think
Don't
of.
forget, yeah. Don't forget the pygmy, the furtive pygmy so easily forgot. Don't forget about him. Dark Souls. Yeah, I think Dark Souls. Listen, I was like almost done with games. I think that I was in college. I had played a lot of stuff. I was feeling like I was even I was like single. I had like my own sort of apartment. Had like a TV, had a computer, and I was like, nothing is interesting in games right now. This is like Wii U time. Like the Wii U was like ruined my faith in Nintendo for the time being. Like I wasn't really interested.
That was a very dark era.
On PlayStation. That was a very dark era.
Yeah.
PC gaming was like starting to pick up more steam with like Steam, but like there was like not a lot of good stuff I felt around when Dark Souls came out, and I played Dark Souls and was like, good fucking god, this is it. This is like the best thing I've played in forever. And it's funny, we actually talked about Dark Souls on the Discord a few weeks ago, and even for like the sort of the praise Dark Souls gets, I still think, and the person Jump Lust also still thinks that this game is like fiercely underrated for how good it is. It's just like, I think what I said as well was that for me, like when I sit down to play a game with a controller, like if I'm trying to play a video game, like the Souls games just deliver on what I want in that experience 100%. Like I like that. I like the challenge of them. I like the sort of itemization. I like the fucking lore and like the weird spirit and stuff. I like some like kind of melodrama. I like the sense of mastery.
The
I
art.
like exploring. I like the art. Like all of that stuff is like, that's what I want from a video game. And Dark Souls was like, fuck, like just consistently amazing. I think the other thing that's really special about Dark Souls, I mean, the game's cultural legacy is huge now. Like, I remember listening to some like big video games person was talking about video games, and they were basically talking about how before Dark Souls happened, you basically couldn't kill the player in a video game. And I think that's really hard for us to remember. But basically before, I mean, games did exist where you could die, obviously, but Dark Souls was this watershed moment that made it where games could be difficult and be about like skill again, and not to be like gatekeepy about that, but specifically like you didn't die. Like you didn't die in video games near as much as you did post Dark Souls. Um, and so it's just like a big deal for that. But then also just like the whole world design of this game. Uh, Everyone who's played Dark Souls knows what I'm about to talk about, and I'll end it on this because everyone I think has played and understands Dark Souls. But one of the biggest things about this game that is so amazing is that the world itself essentially sort of folds on itself. Like not actually folding. It is a physical space that doesn't defy physics mostly. Um, but what's special about Dark Souls is that the game is very weird in both its tone and how it plays, and doesn't explain a lot. So it's very easy to feel out of your depth very quickly, especially because the game itself doesn't give you like almost any hints about where to go. And the system in the game where you have this notion of bonfires, which are effectively save points. If you die, you return to a bonfire. However, what Dark Souls 1 is so good at that has not been really repeated in Dark Souls 2 or Bloodborne, I haven't played Sekiro or 3 yet, so I don't know, is that when you're exploring in Dark Souls, you don't know where your next bonfire is. Not only that, but it's very easy to feel lost in Dark Souls, only to realize that you weren't actually lost and you were going the right direction you were supposed to be going. And that like feeling is incredible. It is so incredible. And Dark Souls 1 gets that perfectly. And like every other game since then has just been sort of a pale imitation of that, because you sort of know what's happening. At the time when you're playing it, you have like no idea like that this is going to happen and this is how things go. And that's just like that moment specifically of just like feeling out of your depth and feeling sort of scared and feeling a little lost and feeling like you're about to like eat shit, only to like have that bonfire hit and just be able to like just take a breath, is like, man, that is like so good.
I want to tack onto this too, which is like basically making a similar point, is that I think Dark Souls kind of helped to pave the road. I think it was really influential in that exact thing that you're talking about, which is that one of the great things that video games can provide is this sense of exploration, right? And you have games that came before it that like really kind of demonstrated that, or served as a stand-in or symbol for that sensation. I think of like Hyrule Field from Ocarina of Time was like the first time you stepped onto Hyrule Field. How did that make you feel, or whatever? But like what games didn't kind of really capture about that experience is that it is an inherently horrifying experience. Like, have you ever just like walked around a place that like you do not have a map of, or like swam into like a coral reef, like past a reef, and just seeing the ocean drop off into like vast nothingness underneath you? Like it's really scary. But that's like what's kind of also great about exploration, is just that sense of not knowing what's ahead of you and that sense of danger. And I think that's something that like that really kind of, it was like tapping at our doors before that, in the sense of like, I feel like survival horror was a big thing in the kind of era before Dark Souls.
Yeah.
And I think it's because like horror itself taps into that same emotional space for adults, where it's like this sense of exploration and fear in your head of the unknown. But Dark Souls kind of meshed that sensation into this like environmental thing, where it's like the story and how it's kind of being given to you piecemeal and fleshing out the world around you, the way that you progress through the world, the way that the reward system works, the way that the art is mostly scary as shit, but sometimes is like beautiful too. All of these things like help to influence, I think, a lot of other areas too. Like, I think about fucking like Subnautica, or even Minecraft. I don't think Minecraft was necessarily influenced by Dark Souls, but that sense of exploration and how those two things kind of like mix together, I think that's something that Dark Souls did really well. And then we've got someone in the chat who raises a good point too, that it had a huge impact on multiplayer and online interaction. Definitely cannot be overlooked. Just this like kind of passive multiplayer that it has, that can turn into something more if you kind of opt into that experience. But yeah, helping other people through this world is, and having that sense of like, oh, someone's here trying to help me, is like a neat little sensation too.
I think just to like go off the last thing you said too, is like in terms of like not knowing, specifically in Dark Souls, you like never know what you're gonna get. There's no way you start that game and know what to expect. And even like if you actually like read like item descriptions and stuff that might hint at what you might see, you're like, what? Nah. And then you like see some shit and you're like, what the fuck? Like, this is like, what?
Nothing can really prepare you. That's for sure.
Nothing can prepare you. You can just prepare to die, I think is the thing. I think Dark Souls also gets a bad rap for being hard. It is like a hard game, but it is so much more than that. And I think that the difficulty of it is sort of important to what it's trying to do. However, I also think that Dark Souls should have an easy mode so other people can enjoy all the weirdness of it. So
yeah, I agree. That's a totally different conversation, but I agree.
Yeah.
Some people's easy is, your hard is some people's easy,
It's true. It's true.
And it will still be a hard, it could still be a hard experience, even if it is easy. Sheesh. Anyway.
Sheesh. What you got next for us, Joshua? Only
Another
on PlayStation.
PS2. Can you tell I was a PlayStation person?
I can tell. Can you tell I was a Nintendo kid?
Not yet.
Uh-oh.
Well, sort of, I guess.
Tell them what it is.
Shadow of the Colossus.
Hell yeah.
Shadow of the Colossus. Still
certified art by Roger Ebert.
Certified. R.I.P. We got the sign off. We got the go ahead from Mr. Ebert.
Oh, this is the remake.
Yeah, this is the remake.
Looks way too good to be the
Yeah. I mean, who was doing shit like this on the PS2? Like, nobody. Like it's just there still hasn't been a game like it where it's just like you versus like, a bunch. It's like, it's nuts to me that this game exists. Japan has a few of those where it's just like, how did this get made and how did it become so popular? And like, where is Western, like, how come we don't really get as much of these kind of things from like Western developers, Like, this shit was, you just ride a horse around and that's like mostly it. Like, there's like,
I mean, you're killing monsters.
Yeah, but that's like once every couple hours you're doing that. But the rest of the time you're just like riding around and doing, it's not even really puzzles. You're just like traversing shit. You don't collect. People were like, well, what do you do in this game? When it first came out, it was just like, what do you even do? And to me, like, that was so revelatory at the time that I was just like, okay, I'm 100% in. And
it's also so funny because it's such a fucking video game. Like, that, this is the other thing that's hilarious about this game, is that in the scope of things that are like our game's art, like, you're going around killing monsters on horseback in this video game with like pretty clear like game ass systems. Like, it's not even, it's like, it's arty in its own weird way, but like Shadow of the Colossus is like very much a video game. You just like don't have a health bar, and that's like makes it be like experimental or something.
I think you do have a health bar, don't you? You have a health bar.
Do you have a health bar?
Yeah.
That appears upon your head? Oh,
no,
shit.
No, it's like in the bottom corner. I mean, the interface is like pretty gamey for sure. But I see what you're saying. But at the same time, like, it's just different for a game,
Yeah.
It's like,
oh yeah, no, I totally agree. It's like it's strange still.
Yeah, and it's got its own like distinctive visual style. It's got that whole like we don't really know what the hell's actually going on in this world, and like I think it's more fun not to know exactly what's happening in the game's plot, which was like pretty rare for that time too, which is why there's like so many hundreds of Shadow of the Colossus ending explained type stuff where it's like the Tahoe takes place in the same universe as blah blah blah, you know. Yeah, I mean, also emotional game, almost made me cry back in the day.
It's definitely got that feeling of like, I mean, we both grew up in the United States, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's not. This game has this feeling of like, oh shit, look what came from Japan, vibe of like a Western kid who's like, the internet is just starting to emerge. You heard about this weird thing, and you're like playing this because you rented it at Blockbuster or something, and you're just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, it's got that like weird like. I think of games like Fatal Frame on like PS2 that
mm.
also had this sort of like felt like the whole game was taking place through like a gauze or something where like is that am I killing a fucking giant?
Yeah,
What is that? Its fate? Like it's got this whole like aura about it that I think made it really special. And in a way it was also like very universal, right? Like there's no dialogue, there's no way to tell that it was like really made by non-Western developers. There's no like, you know, localization or whatever to like get lost in the fact. So I think everyone's able to have a very personal connection to this game when it came out because it sort of felt like yours. It felt too weird for other people to know about it. It was just something that you like heard of, or someone you
I think I
knew
saw
might have
like the
played it once.
review on like X Play or something.
Yeah. But even then, right, that's next to like fucking Beautiful Joe. So if you're like trying to get a game for Christmas, you're like, I'm gonna pick the one where there's an action character like punching dudes than this like
I mean, Beautiful
horseback
Joe is
game.
dope too.
I mean, Beautiful Joe fucking rips. Don't
Yeah,
get me wrong. Where's Beautiful Joe at in 2021?
I don't know, but I know where our next game is.
You got it up? What's the next game? Oh man, look at it. Ocarina of Time. Whew. This is on my list. It was also secretly on Josh's list too. Notably, we both had the same answer, which was Ocarina of Time / Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild having actually for me a very similar thing that Dark Souls had, where I think Breath of the Wild, I was like so down on Nintendo and like everything after the Wii U. I played Breath of the Wild, and like that game solely restored my faith in Nintendo. And then they've been basically making good on that. I feel like Nintendo's been on a streak, even if their whole strategy for the past 3-4 years has been re-releasing Wii U games on the Switch, which like, sure, sorry I ever doubted you. Breath of the Wild fucking rips, but Ocarina of Time is special because this game, I think this game was hitting. This game still is great, which I think is very rare for older games. Usually not because the game like falls apart or something, but that some other game has come along and did what it was trying to do better and it looks better or whatever. Ocarina of Time is still great, which is incredible considering how old it is. It's like fucking impossible to play now, which is annoying. You can't play it anywhere besides a fucking 3DS or like an emulator. But this game was like, this is a very like Kyle childhood game. Like I remember the first time I was playing this, I used to get my hair cut at someone's like house, and like while my dad was getting his hair cut, I would like go to the son's room and like play his N64, and I would play Ocarina of Time. I had no idea what it was, and I could obviously knock it out of like the Deku Village or whatever. So there was this weird like meshing of like my childhood with like the Kokiri Village, which is like, I don't know, beautiful and poetic. I'm sure I could write like a Medium article on it. So, but then like when I actually got an N64 later, I like got a strategy guide and actually sort of worked my way and like beat the game. I don't know, whenever that was on N64, and had this like weird like when I first started playing Ocarina of Time, I was like sort of pre really even like being like a preteen or kid. I was like sort of before that. So this game has this very sort of special thing that it acted as this bridge to this other time of like being like really wide-eyed about the world into actually becoming a person who lives in the world as like a child or like a preteen or something. And then to have that game sort of echo consistently throughout the rest of my life in different formats like Majora's Mask, Skyward Sword, uh, Twilight Princess, Breath of the Wild, etc. This game is like, I feel like it's my game. Like I don't feel like I'm like Link or something, although maybe I do if I look search deep down inside myself. But this game and how, like what it is feels like endemic to my being. Like it has been there with me since I have been a person. And and the fact that like Link is a kid who becomes like a older teen or something, that whole thing in there is great. Um,
It's like
and
it's like my
go ahead.
Kingdom Hearts thing.
Yeah, like you sort of like grew up with Sora. Like I feel like I've like grown up with Link.
To be fair, I also feel like Ocarina of Time is my game
Yeah.
too. But I'm
It's
sure a
fine. It
lot of
can be
people
your
feel
game.
like that.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
It's just like it's good too, which is the other thing. This game holds up. It holds up. It like still feels like mystical and magical and wonderful and like sad and mysterious and like the whole thing is like so good. Um yeah.
I think it has
Damn.
like a really great sense of depth in its world building that a lot of other open world games have not had even since then. Like if I
Yeah.
look at like your average Assassin's Creed game or like your average fucking like Watch Dogs or any like open world game that is like X miles big,
Yeah.
Ocarina of Time like often still feels like there's more to the world, you know?
And people are still like to this day making YouTube videos about like Ocarina of Time secrets and places that you can't get to and like implied lore,
Yeah.
which is also crazy considering that like this was sort of one of the first major like 3D games ever. And the fact that like no one's out here like standing Pong, like this is like one of the first major 3D character action games. And the fact that it's like not only like holds up, but is like still actually a good game is like fucking insane.
I think there's also
And the fact that it came from like a 2D game, right? Like this isn't even a new franchise at this point. This is actually being
right.
translated from another format, which is like
it's also interesting too
nuts.
how like it's also one of the most interesting games to watch people break. You know? Because like it feels like there's so much behind the wall that you're not seeing, and then they go through and it's just this like vast nothingness, but also there's like kind of something there, even if it's just like the broken bits of this game that people are collecting to like beat Ganon in like one hit or whatever. Yeah, it's a great game.
It's so good. I'm just like just like watching this and being like, man, this game is something. I was really hoping that they would remaster or re-release it for Switch, which feels like a no-brainer. Granted, that's probably really fucking hard, but I would still like it. Oh, and also I forgot to mention Wind Waker, also great. However, Ocarina of Time, Breath of the Wild. One thing I do want to say about Breath of the Wild before we go on to your final game, I think it is that what was one of the most amazing things about Breath of the Wild had to do with this sort of affinity that I had built up over my literal lifetime for Zelda, where Breath of the Wild basically like delivers on what Ocarina of Time hints at. Like if you actually go back and like run around like Hyrule Field and Ocarina of Time, it's like it's not very big. It's like it's big for like the time, but as a thing, it's just like, oh, it's like a big, basically empty area or something. And like Zora's domain is like, it's like a waterfall in a room, you know, like the Great Fairy Fountains are like a kiddie pool. When you go play Breath of the Wild, you're like, oh fuck, Hyrule Field is a fucking field. The Gerudo Valley is a giant ass valley. Like Death Mountain is a fucking mountain. And like that whole thing felt like oh my God, like this is what I imagined and what I thought was happening for this. And that was like no other game has that possibility for me to ever happen, because it's Zelda, and am grateful that it still exists. So
Thanks, Kyle.
you're welcome, Josh.
Last game for me
Oh,
is League of Legends.
Dota 2.
League of Legends. I mean, I guess this could be like insert esport here, but to me, it's like it's League personally, just because it's, you know, the game is tied in with like another era of my life. Like I have like specific people tied to this game that like I've met through playing League of Legends, that like it's sort of the dawn, for me at least, of like games as a social thing. Like I started watching streamers because of League. I started following people and getting, you know, learning more about like the people who play games. And I think that sense of like connection is important for video games, as like a thing that is like that creates communities around itself that like have life and that are capable of creating history and like interesting scenarios that you would never see otherwise. And this game was kind of like the gateway to that for me. And, you know, like I realized that, you know, there's a lot wrong with League, and I realized that, you know, this is going to be a kind of different game for everyone else, I'm sure. But man, like there's this connected to so many things. Like I can open Twitter and it's like I know so many people on this Twitter through like League, or who themselves have been like involved with this community. Or like I can look at like my fucking Facebook and like friends that I like made through playing this game, or who like I've shared like hours and hours playing this thing with. And it's just like it's a fun game, and I think it's like accessible enough that it really appeals to that many people, and it's become less difficult in some ways to have to apologize for the more it's been around, because like there's so much more to it than the shittiness now. Like before, it used to be like you had to apologize for like how actually like kind of bad the gameplay was, but now the gameplay is fucking great in my opinion. Now like the lore and storytelling in the game is like some of the best out there when it comes to like this type of game. Now the competitive scene is like, it's, you know, it's kind of like the competitive esports scene. It's like the premier esport. That's probably, you know, it's probably changing. But there's a lot about League that persists when other things have faded. And it's a great game, and I think like the things that surround it are also great. So
why do you think League was the one? When I think, well, specifically like when it started, because at the time, right, there was like, I mean, Dota 2 was late to the jump, but like Han was still happening, and I feel like there were like 2 or 3 others. When like I remember specifically playing League in like 2009 or something when I first got to college, and there were like a lot of games that were like basically free to play MOBA stuff. Like what made League sort of like win out, do you think?
I think
like someone in chat says League was free to play and Han was $15. I mean, that could honestly be, this was like in 2009, free to play was like not a thing. So a game being free was a huge fucking deal.
Yes, and I think that's like a big part of it too. And I mean, when I talked to, like, for instance, I did some esports reporting, and I interviewed I'm a Cutie Pie, who was like at the time basically one of the biggest League of Legends streamers, which is saying a lot. But you know, I talked to him and like, how did you get into this game? And like, why this game specific? And he's like, oh, well, it was free, you know? And it's like, that's a big thing that people just kind of forget about. You know, when
Yeah.
you're not of these circumstances of playing video games, you kind of don't really realize or understand the extent to which that shit actually matters. You know, and then beyond that, also, there's the whole element of like, how easy is it to use? Like, a lot of people give League shit of like, it's like a less complex Dota. It's like there's like Dota, but there's just like not as much going on, you know, or like it's the systems aren't as like deep. But it's like that's the whole thing. That's like literally the game's entire selling point, is that like it's like Dota, but like way easier to get into than that, you know. And I think Riot in general is really good. I think Blizzard used to be the best at this, but I think Riot's kind of overtaken them, which is like taking these like really good complex video game ideas and boiling them down into like this middle ground where they're like still approachable but have this sense of complexity, while still being like open to a lot of new people, right?
Yeah.
And I think over time, like they've tried to make it like even more approachable, and part of it is just like making it more normal for people to like do this kind of thing and like partake in this kind of community, which I see a lot in Valorant. Like there's a lot of different types of people who play Valorant, and that's more the case with League now, but it took them a while to kind of get to that point. But that being said, like I think to get to that point, you really have to make like a really good game concept but easier, and that's harder to do than it might seem, I think, while acknowledging the fact that like when it came out it was basically a Dota ripoff, you know, to a large extent.
I mean, it looks like like the sort of house style of Blizzard at the time, for sure, too.
Potentially.
This was like Warcraft 3. WoW, like this was like their bread and butter look and style, like this sort of blocky, cartoonish fantasy stuff.
Yeah.
Not that like matters, but I think that there is something with that. But
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it did feel familiar to people, I think.
I think what I really respect, like as like a developer, like a lot of the material Riot produces on its sort of process for working with League. Like I think it'd be very easy to sort of assume that like it's very easy to make something like League. You're like, oh, just copy Dota or whatever. But I think that Riot seems to have a really good understanding of what League is and how it should be, and sort of they openly talk about like their process of like designing and balancing it in a way that is like kind of like not typical of, especially a game like this, like the fucking biggest game in the world. Like it's not no one is expecting that person to really go in depth to the degree that they do, like talking about how they make this thing.
Yeah.
So like maybe at the start it was like a Dota clone or whatever, but I get the sense they have a pretty clear vision about what it should be, and yeah, I don't know, it's cool.
Legends of Runeterra is great too. Epilogue.
Legends of Runeterra. Are you still playing Legends of Runeterra?
Yeah, it's so good, man. It's so good.
I should give it another go.
It's so good. I love it.
Oh, it's so good.
It's
Pull up my last game. Let's show the people.
All right.
I'm gonna oblaviate for a second. We got a few questions as well from the Discord for the Hundo. We'll probably answer those because this is for the fans and normal people as well, as Josh stated, but also for the fans. As a reminder, I did a little call out a few episodes ago to talk about the Discord, and someone did join because they said they liked how I pitched it. So I'll just go through it one more time. If you back us on Patreon, I think at $3, I believe, you get access to our Discord. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, I'm in a million Discords already. I don't want to be in another Discord. And what I will tell you is that's true. Maybe don't back Bad End. If you don't, I mean, we would still appreciate the money. Don't join the Discord. However, if you like how we talk about games on Bad End and you like talking about the stuff that we talk about, or anybody else in Superculture's network, so Funland, Heterotopias, Bullet Points, berserk now through the review, all this stuff. The Discord is where we talk about all that stuff with the same way. It feels to me like a continuation of the podcast now. So if you like hearing about games like this, talking about games like this, you're looking for other people who share similar interests to us, come hang out. It's
Also,
nice.
it's a
We also
great
talk
like
about
community. Like we're hanging out IRL.
it's good people.
Like
Everyone's
I
hanging
literally
out.
hung out with Jump Lust from the server last weekend.
Yeah.
His
We become
buddy.
real
Okay, look,
friends.
this is a crazy experience actually. His buddy has an arcade in his garage, dude. And I'm
Hell
not
yeah.
talking like a shitty little like those little shitty games that you get that are like a 1,000,001 game system. No, he owns like the original cabinets and he's got
Oh
like
my
at
God.
least 30 of them. An
Damn.
intense collection, a beautiful collection. And we
Beautiful.
yeah, you just go in and we're just playing games like all night.
That sounds tight.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Just kicking it and gaming.
It was just a trip to just go in this guy's garage. It's just filled. I mean, he's got it like decorated like an arcade, and there's like 80s music playing in there. It's really cool. It's really cool.
So join the Discord. You might be able to go see the garage arcade with Josh and Jump Lust.
Yeah.
One last thing I'll say about the Discord. It's also chill. It is not crazy. It's not that you're not going to join. There's not going to be 10,000 people and it's like flying by. You can join, hang out, find out where you fit. You want to talk about anime? Come join Weeb Zone. Did you make some cool food? We got a food channel. You like talking about board games? We got a board game channel. We also have a video game channel. We want to talk about video games. So come hang out. It's $3 a month. If you want to join the Discord and you don't want to pay us $3, you can probably just message us. We'll probably give you
Also, it's
access.
going toward a good cause. I mean,
Probably.
we're realizing that like the stuff that we want to do costs money.
It's true.
And it actually does help us. We're trying to get we're trying to get we're trying to get merch and stuff. This shit's expensive to start, dude. So believe me, like especially with if you want to work with specific artists and stuff like that, like it takes a bit to get this stuff off the ground. So
It takes a bit.
we do appreciate every donation we get. And while we haven't like bought new mics recently or anything like that, like there's a lot of stuff that we want to do that's like it costs money to get done. So it does help us.
True that.
But yeah, let's get this last. Here's Kyle's
Last game. Bring it up.
Is this it? Yeah, it is.
No, it's not it, man.
I thought it was
Fucking
this one.
Amateur hour. No. No.
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
Which
It's
one
definitely
is
not
it? Just
Okay,
say the
so
name.
my
and I'll
game
find
is my game is Paper Mario and the 1,000-Year Door.
This says Paper Mario: The 1,000-Year Door GameCube trailer.
Was it called Paper Mario 2 before the 1,000-Year Door? Oh my god, I don't know if I knew that. That does look like 1,000-Year Door now. Yeah, this is 1,000-Year Door. Weird. Okay, well, there it is. I guess they when they announced the trailer, they didn't have the subtitle for it yet. Paper Mario and the 1,000-Year Door is one of my favorite games of all time. Have you played this, Josh?
I have not.
I don't even know how to describe. So if you listen to Bad End podcast, you will know that I was a big fan of Paper Mario and the Origami King. I actually called it, I think it was my GOTY of last year.
Was it?
Or it was like my number one or something. I remember because we said Animal Crossing was like the GOTY because of COVID and stuff, but I think that my game was Origami King. Anyways, Paper Mario as a series is God, I'm so bad at talking about Paper Mario because it sounds crazy, all right? Because this is what Paper Mario does. You ready for this?
Just say it.
What Paper Mario does is it makes you care about the Mario lore, which sounds crazy. But what it does is Paper Mario basically it's an RPG mostly. Origami King was a little bit of a departure, but the game in general, Thousand Year Door and the first Paper Mario game are effectively RPGs. Um, what makes them different from like just your other average like JRPG ish thing is two things. One is that you have this notion of a companion who is someone who has special abilities. That companion cannot be switched out and will change throughout the course of the story. So you'll get a new companion based on where you're at in the game. The other thing is the fucking writing, which is like such a kind of weird thing to talk about, I think, for games and why they should be good. But what Paper Mario does, it is like, as a series, it is one of the only series that is like consistently like funny without being like cringy, and like generally like joyous and sort of like earnest without being cloying. And that line is like so hard to like ride, that most games just don't do it. Then most games are just like saccharine, or like they're come off as like nice core or whatever. Paper Mario is like not that. It's like it's just a genuinely like really well written series of games that like are just sort of a joy to be inside of, and they've got like this sort of cinch of joy and wonder inside of the games themselves. Um, and the other thing is that like the just like I think sort of like something like Dark Souls a little bit, is that the structure of Paper Mario games is sort of like even something like Kingdom Hearts, where you go to like worlds kind of that are their own sort of closed system of like stuff. So what's nice about that is that when you're playing Paper Mario, you don't really ever know what you're going to get next. Like just because two worlds are connected doesn't really mean that they're going to be thematically related. So you'll like go to places and like find out other cool stuff. And so Thousand Year Door specifically is like the best version of this. It's got like the most interesting sort of world. It's got the most interesting cast of like side characters, and the whole underlying story of the game itself is really interesting. It also, the other thing about these games is that they are pretty funny. They specifically acknowledge that everyone is paper. So they do like really weird stuff that's both humor related and sort of related to actually playing the game, that revolves around the fact that Mario is like a paper creature or a paper thing. So Thousand Year Door specifically leans into this, because for Thousand Year Door, you can like fold yourself up into different shapes that give you different powers. You can like turn yourself sideways and like go through cracks in a wall. You can like turn into like a paper plane and like fly around or whatever. And it's just fucking great. I think also the interesting thing actually that's been happening is that I think other indie games are starting to catch wise of Paper Mario's style. So something like A Short Hike and Pikuniku, both of which are really great, owe a lot to Paper Mario. And I think other indie games are starting to look in that direction, where you're not doing the like writing that sounds like you're just texting someone, sort of like, I don't know, like millennial-ish dialogue, which I would describe like a lot of sort of like written indie games are like that. There's this other sort of style that Paper Mario does really well, that other games are starting to pick up on as a way to be earnest without having to feel like you're sort of trying to be like, I don't know, relevant or something, or like modern or whatever. So I think other people are catching on to how these games are written and how they sort of do their stuff, because in a way it becomes very timeless. It's like very fun to play them, and the jokes still hit. The dialogue is still sort of silly. Yeah. Also, I will shout out again, Origami King is really good. Origami King is like, I don't know, maybe in like 5 years I'll think it's better than Thousand Year Door. I don't think the dichotomy really matters, but Origami King I think is a really wonderful Paper Mario game outside of the battle system, which is fucking stupid. Everything else about it's great though. So actually, I feel like Paper Mario's got a. No, I think I was waiting for it to get better, and it just never did. Literally ever. Yeah. Yeah. Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, man. It's just solid. It's got no loose ends. The whole thing feels great. The world feels great. It has a special place in my heart because it's like a JRPG game that like makes you use the items that you pick up, which is like not a thing. Like the items sort of matter. It's the whole conceit is great. Just every little detail of the game is just so wonderful.
Speaking of which, my sixth selection is the BioWare Sonic the Hedgehog game. Just kidding.
BioWare? I was like, excuse me? What about Shadow
That's
the
a
Hedgehog?
real game.
I know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
It was
it
actually
just
pretty
called
good.
like Sonic?
I think it was like Sonic
like-
and the like Chaos Emeralds or something.
I thought it was just called Sonic.
Sonic
Sonic
Chronicles:
Chronicles?
The Dark Brotherhood.
Oh, I don't know this.
Yeah. BioWare
All right.
Sonic RPG.
All right, BioWare, go off. I'm
Go
doing
off, BioWare
Sonic.
Kings.
1,000-Year Door, though, man. Whew.
Yeah.
This game is worth playing. Holds up. One last thing I'll say. The Mario lore is weird. And it's weird in a way that is like very funny and silly. And it's something that you never see in any other Mario game really at all. Maybe like a little bit in like Odyssey. But I think that for stuff that could so easily just be background, and it is largely background for most Mario games, the fact that they forefront this stuff for Paper Mario, it could have totally been terrible, but it's actually wonderful. And like, you'll never look at a Bomb-Omb the same way ever again, or like a Boo or something, because they've got personality and thoughts and ideas. Yeah. So it's good. Love that.
All right. Well, there's our top 10 games.
Say your top list again, just for the people, so we can have it nicely.
The whole
done.
thing?
Oh yeah, just say your
They're
list.
not in any given order.
They're not in order. Yeah.
Kingdom Hearts, The Witcher 3, Disco Elysium, Shadow of the Colossus, League of Legends. Do you want me to read yours too? Oh, okay.
Animal Crossing, Anno 1800, Dark Souls, Ocarina of Time / Breath of the Wild, and then Paper Mario and 1,000-Year Door, which apparently was called Paper Mario 2 before it had a title.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good list. I would stand by that list.
Yeah, I like it for us, for me and you. If it was like, if Katie was here, it'd be a lot different, obviously. We'd probably have 15 entries, but yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the last 4 years.
Let's do it.
And then we can go into our listener ideas / questions. But I wanted to talk about how gaming has changed since then. I think the big ones to me are like the evolution. We were talking about this earlier, but the evolution of games journalism and criticism, which is that it feels like a lot of stuff that existed then has kind of like evaporated. And a lot of like the spaces for talking about games the way that we used to, and the discourse itself has to a large extent kind of faded away or gone to places that are a lot more difficult to get your hands on. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I feel like I don't feel like I come across interesting takes as much as I used to. It feels in a way where if we're going to keep making the same games, what has been said about them has been said about them. And despite maybe criticism trying, I don't think that the games industry largely listens to criticism in terms of like crit, not like Metacritic scores. It doesn't seem like things are changing. And I get the sense people are just sort of tired. I mean, shout out to Bullet Points, once again, part of Superculture Network, doing the good work. But like Bullet Points is few and far between for other sort of similar publications.
Also, yeah, no, I think like that's where you find this stuff now, as opposed to at that time.
Superculture
like,
Network.
I mean, that, like, I think of like, Uppercut.
Yeah.
Deep Hell, stuff like that. Like, there's places to find this, but you used to be able to find them at those places, plus, like, the big websites. But there were more of them at the time, like,
Well, yeah, this was like Zam was happening as a thing at this time.
yeah,
And
there was like
everyone going to
Destructoid,
Zam.
Vice Game / Waypoint was
Well,
like
Destructoid still
had a lot
exists.
more.
Yeah,
No, I'm not
Waypoint
saying
was
they
a
don't
big
exist,
one,
but
yeah.
like the extent to which they are doing this kind of thing has fallen
Yeah.
off a lot. I mean, if
I mean,
you
the
got
death
Giant
of
Bomb,
Waypoint feels sort of indicative of what you're talking about. Like Waypoint sort of going from Vice Gaming to Waypoint to now back to kind of Waypoint, not really,
yeah,
is like, that feels like sort of indicative of what you're talking about.
right.
Which
And
is,
I want to
yeah.
talk about that. I want to talk more about that because obviously that's changed, and we skirt around what's going on here a lot, I think, because it's very hard to talk about without doing the game journalism thing of like throwing other people under the bus, of like just being an asshole to someone and saying like, oh, well, you sucked. But something happened here, like, obviously to a large extent, it has to do with people getting screwed over by media in general, which is a shitty field to be in, and extremely numbers driven, and everyone just gets thrown under the bus at some point or another. And it happens to you every day, especially if you're like a marginalized person who's writing about this stuff. Patricia Hernandez, who is now the editor-in-chief of Kotaku, has been dealing with this stuff since she started more than a decade ago. And it's still a thing, which is just nuts. And it's like at a certain point, like, how do you deal with that? But at the same time, this is not a but. There's no counter to this thing. But at the same time, like, we have to acknowledge that the conversation around video games it's not great. It's not like those things left and all of a sudden, like, it does not like signal any improvement of the conversation around video games. It still sucks. But it weirds me out because I was thinking about this the other day, and I was thinking about how, like I kind of brought up earlier, about how when I first started listening to video game podcasts, and when I first decided I wanted to start a video game podcast, that was in like 2013, I think. And I was listening to video game podcasts on like my way home, and I had like an hour and a half commute each way. And that was like obviously a big part of me doing this stuff. But then, like, when I didn't have a commute anymore, I just like started all of a sudden listening to like way less podcasts. And here I was like making podcasts. But then at the same time, I'm like watching live streams of podcasts. And it's like, it goes to show just how audiences, and this is just something that we take for granted, but audiences are a thing. It sounds self-evident, but there's like times in your life where you are just predisposed to being the audience for something, and then times of your life where you're just kind of like not just there. You just don't align with it. And I think you have to kind of slow down and recognize that to an extent, and like really understand that. And one of the weird things about video games is that like we have audiences that are in different places that are hard to reach because like you're just not really reaching out to them in that way. Like because there are so many places and so many channels on which you can exist, whether you're an RPG gamer, single player gamer, an esports gamer, whether you watch streams, whether you watch podcasts, whether you identify as like, cisgender or trans, or whether, there's so many different kind of buckets to be in at one time that it's so hard to like cater to a significant amount of those people in video games, because video games is always ahead of the curve when it comes to this shit. And it's always like there's always like so many things going on at the same time. You know what I'm saying? Like streaming was like kind of video games' thing at first.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a lot of places on which video games become a thing. I talked about this a lot with David Turner, this music critic. He used to write for MTV. He has like a really great newsletter about like Spotify and musicians and how they make money and stuff like that. But I was talking with him about how like gaming is always like the incubation chamber for like where media is going to be in a couple years. Like if you just all you have to really do is like look at Discord. Like
yeah,
that's like how communities exist now. And that's like based on this gaming model. Look at Twitch and like how that's becoming more of a thing. Like it was like Facebook Live became a thing shortly after that to a larger extent. But video games has had to reckon with this kind of before a lot of other people, and we never really had the resources to kind of like expand the media channels into all of the places that it like really deserves to be. And because of that, there was a lot of disconnect where you have people who are like will really resonate with a specific audience who are forced to talk with like people who are in like an entirely different place, right? Who should be open to different ideas and who should be able to like understand this stuff, because it's not like absurd to say to like listen to a Patricia Hernandez or any number of other like marginalized people who are working for these publications who are writing about the same games that you've been playing forever and providing valuable new opinions about these things. But it's like the speed at which this stuff is expanding in the video game space far outpaces the ability of any corporation to sufficiently address that. And at the same time, the like vehicle for doing this type of publishing in an independent capacity is also not robust enough for that. I mean, like you can look at Bad End, you can look at Superculture, and we're doing what we can here, but it's like there are so many places for us to be, so many things we want to do, so many audiences we want to cover that all fit under our purview of trying to like give attention to what we believe is underobserved. But it's like, holy shit, man, there's too many places to be. We don't have the resources or people. Like we need to like hire people. We need so many things if we ever want to reach out to that. But if you think I wrote for Kotaku for like 3 years only covering Hearthstone, just think about that shit. And like I got a lot of readers because a lot of people play fucking Hearthstone. That's just one video game. And you have one person dedicated to writing about that game. How is anyone supposed to do this shit? Like you don't have, this is not the way other media works. This is a problem that is unique up until this point to video games. It's not unique to video games, but the way it hits video games is unique because we are kind of like at the vanguard of how you like young people interface with, you know, this like artistic medium, you know, like they don't have to do this shit for books necessarily. Like they don't really have to do this shit necessarily for movies. But because games like reaches into so many places, like the expectations on the people who talk about games and the games that they're talking about is nuts. If you think about it, like it's kind of a nuts idea that like you have whole publications that are writing about League of Legends that like only follow it casually. And there's people who, you know, your average League of Legends player would like know more than some of these people. But that's just like how it works. And like, it's never been something that has been like reckoned with. And it sucks because like the person who is writing about it is the one who takes the majority of the flack for it when it's not their fault. You know?
I think what's really hard about what you're describing too is that there's like so many games and the publications that have the time and space to write about games at all are like sort of small. Um, and so like if someone covers your game or whatever, it might be they're probably not like a super fan, right? They're probably just someone who's like covering a game. But because like so many people play games and games are like such a big thing now, you can like write like one article on something and then like the hate mob of that game's like Reddit or whatever will come like mob your article and your comments. They're not readers of the site. They don't care about the site. They cared about you wrote about like their game and like didn't get, you know, minuscule point number 6 exactly right. So like why are you writing about this thing at all?
It's
Yeah.
like it's the whole thing is that the whole issue is that there are thousands of communities within video games where you can dedicate your whole life to that thing and be one of like a very large number of people who does the same thing,
Yeah.
right? They're like, and yet, if you are not an insider in these communities, you're an outsider, or you're an interloper, or you're an invader trying to destroy the space, or you're misrepresenting that thing. And yet, there are thousands of these communities, and dozens, maybe hundreds of publications covering them at most. So you have like your limited people who are the faces of these communities, and it's really kind of the luck of the draw who these people are. Like some of them are just like gonna be assholes, and you're just gonna build your community on like a total just scumbag, you know. And I think that's like a really shitty reality that we live in, and I think it's one of the reasons why the discussion around this stuff never really evolves, because we are so busy trying to catch up with it that it's very hard for us to make the right observations about it. And I think the fact that these past 4 years have been so belligerent, and we live in this like shadow of Gamergate to a large extent, like that's just kind of how things are now, that there's no like space for nuance. Like you're always either like, there's so many things that you can't really like acknowledge or talk about because it's just like a taboo thing. Like you'll be associated with them if you do. It's just there's so many thorns in the conversation, and it just sucks because and it's all because like this shit is expanding faster than we can keep up with it, and if you make a mistake, you're fucked.
I think I will say one part of this that I think is also true is that I don't feel like a lot of publications are trying to change the model. I mean, shout out to Waypoint, I think is probably one of the first. I mean, they ended up
But
going the way they did,
they
but like
they don't
I feel
have
like
the
very
resources to change the model, man. Like
no, I
Kotaku,
think
no, the Kotaku's trying to change the model. Like their whole embed system was meant to address this. Like literally, that's the entire point of their embed system. It's like, okay, we're gonna have one writer that's just gonna write about Hearthstone. We have one writer who's just gonna write about League of Legends. We have one World of Tanks, whatever. That's like, when you think about it, like that's a good way to kind of go about things. We're gonna have like Tim
I'm
Rogers
talking
make
more
us
about like
videos.
that's what I'm more getting at, right? I think like that's like some of their most successful video content stuff they've done is like hiring good people to do stuff in the mediums that people are engaging with. Where like Kotaku has no streaming presence. What? It is 2021. Why is Kotaku not the biggest fucking streaming presence on Twitch? That is like, that's insane to me. And I think that this is what we saw happen when we first started the podcast was like these things were happening. And like, besides like Waypoint and largely like Austin Walker and what he was doing there, shouts out to Austin Walker, like no one else is like doing these things and like trying to like build the identity off these emerging forms, these things that happen, they're like, okay, well, you still have to do editorial, but also if you want to go try that new thing, go over there and do that. And
You
it's
have to
like,
take it
well,
on yourself, basically.
yeah.
Like you, and
Like, I
you
mean,
have to take
like
the
thinking
brunt
about
of that.
like, well, because even like something like, I know when like US Gamer and stuff was doing the podcast that like Katie was also on, like it wasn't like that wasn't like their core sort of bread and butter thing. But I also know like that stuff is also hard to do, right? Like Katie still was running, I don't know, she's like still working at a job, right? Like doing a podcast in addition to being like her editor position is like a lot of work to do. But I also think that there is like a moment where you say like, hey, what are we doing here, right? What are we doing? How are we changing our model to adapt to what is like emergent? And I think that like what Kotaku did with Tim Rogers, I think is really smart. He left obviously because it was untenable in that model, I think. um but like I
That's
think that
exactly
that,
what
that
I'm saying, dude.
no, that's
Like,
I'm agreeing. What I'm
and
saying is that if we're
think
trying
about
to
the
like do these
amount
things,
think about the amount of time Tim Rogers put into that shit. He would
yeah,
spend, we would literally be taught when we would have him on the show, he's still in the office, like
yeah,
recording
yeah,
there, and it was like 9:30, 10 p.m. and he's like, oh yeah, it's just another night for me, basically. Like, the guy works his ass off, and that fucking sucks. Like, because that's the thing, is like, they just want him to make videos, and the ask is never like revolutionize our entire website and bring us millions of viewers that we wouldn't have otherwise had. Like, it's kind of the ask, but they can't like ask you for that outright. So it's like, just do one video for us a week, blah blah blah, as if that's like some easy thing to do
yeah, yeah, yeah.
whilst meeting the quotas that. And then, again, that's no person at Kotaku's fault. Like, this is the one thing I don't really, I don't want to like talk shit about people at these publications, but that the business practices that force them to do these things on like ungodly time frames are like, it's borderline inhumane at times. Like, and we've seen it happen to our friends, and it fucking sucks, and it drives people out of the industry, where it's like, anyone who did anything good here either got punished for it, they were not like sufficiently recognized for the work that they were doing, their audiences like didn't align with like where they should have been, because the publication was like default making them put their work in a place where it wasn't going to appeal to the max audience that it could have. Or, you know, like, there's so many like spaces where their great work just kind of like slipped through the cracks, and like we didn't have these conversations that we should have. They fell on deaf ears, and instead you've got like fucking any number of video influencers out there who just so happen to make like the one video that got them 3 million followers because they said some funny things about a video game, and now like you got like millions of people subscribing to their shitty worldviews or whatever, you know.
Yeah, my point was just that I think that these people are not going in on these like emerging forms in ways that I think are doing anything but like hurting the people. Like just tossing someone like Tim one video, be like, one video a week to like try our video strategy is like not, that's not how you like build a video strategy. That's how you like burn someone out. So I think that that's just sort of what I'm
Exactly.
getting at, is that I think that the things that are happening is that I view a lot of the games like the games journalism, like professional games journalism industry, is like in a way like pretty stodgy, and they're like, we write articles, and it's like, okay, cool, but like who's reading articles? Like I feel like there's a way where there needs to be a sort of reimagine, and this is like really literally what we're doing now, right? For Bad End, we're saying like, hey, podcasts are cool, however there's a way for us that we should probably adapt some of our strategy to start thinking about YouTube as a medium for podcast transmission, because not everyone is going to download a podcast to listen to an app now. I think there's like, I'm not saying that everyone has to do what we're doing here, but I think there's a way to like look at sort of core competency and say, how can we port this to this new thing? And I think that these places are under resourced. So what they end up doing is they end up not going in to the degree that they need to on the new thing, and then also splitting time or just giving people more work on top of what they're already doing in order to like try something out in sort of a bad faith way. It's not a great cycle, and I'm not like blaming anyone specifically, but I do think that there is part of this where it's like, will an editorial publication survive, like, I don't know,
No,
maybe
this
if
is what
someone's
no
bankrolling it,
we're
you
in
know?
I think we're in complete agreement here.
Yeah.
But we're just which is all of this is just to say that like if you think about that whole idea, like the era of like experimentalism that has defined the last X years of video game journalism, of like, we're gonna try this thing, we're gonna put this person in charge, we're gonna like let them run with it, and it's like their first time doing something like this and they're at the reins, or like you don't have anybody who's like in charge saying like, this is how you do things here. And when you did, it was like someone who was like super relevant to the industry 15 years ago, who like they're doing it and like it's not fucking working, but you're still in charge.
Yeah.
It's like, just think about how all this shit has worked. It's a wonder. It's really a wonder to me, like, how did this all manage to stay afloat for so long? And
Low paid freelancers.
yeah, that's really a big part of it. And it's a really shitty system that has been bad for all of the people involved. And I really feel bad for the people who got burned by this shit. And it sucks because, like, at the same time, parallel to all this, you have a conversation that feels like it's been in stasis for years now, because it's like the same three arguments over and over and over again with the same people, because like no one is meeting anybody where they are. And this is not, I don't mean that in like a ideological sense. I'm not saying that, like, I'm not trying to be like, oh, we should just be more centrist and like meet the gamers where they are. No, I'm saying that like there's never really been like a very good quote conversation within video games. Like the whole concept of like opening up a conversation like never really happened. It was just like journalists getting death threats for like forever,
Saying that like Mario is bad
that's
or something.
the discussion. Yeah, it's like one person got published saying like 3D Marios suck or something, and then everyone being like, I'm gonna do something bad to your family or something. Like it's just this. It's not. It's not like the most constructive way to be talking about games. And I'm not saying I have the answers, but I'm saying like, damn, at some point you got to try something new. But who's that gonna be is the bigger question, and I don't know if there's really an answer to that, because it's pretty clear that the fucking corporations and the media companies don't really know what the fuck they're doing. So good luck to Patricia Hernandez, my colleague, and yeah, I think we can move on.
Like we can actually, there's a, I don't know, I'm trying to think, did anything else talk about like the last 4 years of Bad End? Any like major
Indie, we talk about indie a lot.
Talk about indie stuff. We started the podcast basically when Breath of the Wild came out, which is sort of crazy to think about. Like the Switch was basically just hitting.
Yep.
The podcast used to be, it was called Bad End for a while because like the original pitch was that we talked about like a hot take at the end of each episode after like the break. It's funny because it sort of relates to what you were saying, Josh. It's just like after a while you're like, there's no hot takes. They're all the same. Like there's no like, it's very hard to have an interesting conversation about, or that a conversation that feels like it's not just rehashing some other version of a conversation.
Also, like hot takes were the economy of video game media. Where it was like whoever had the take gets to write the fucking piece. Like if you don't have a take, get the fuck out of here. Like if you're not saying something that sounds just straight dumb the first time you hear it, like I don't want to hear it. I have to be shocked for it to be a pitch that I want to buy. That's like literally what.
It's got to feel transgressive.
Yeah, either that or like an oral history is like the only two things that you get published for like the past 5 years.
So true.
And it's like there's only so many fucking hot takes you can do. It's like, oh, Zelda's bad. Like, And then like you just start seeing the same angles where it's like it's bad because colonialism, it's bad because sexism, it's bad because, and it's like, and then all of a sudden it's like you're just seeing those same 5 articles over and over, and it's like, isn't there more conversation to be had about this stuff deeper than that? Like, it's good because it helped me get through my fucking surgery that I'm going to get this Friday. You know, I am actually going to get surgery this Friday. Hopefully, Zelda will help me get through it, and I can write a really good piece for some publication about it. But yeah, like that sucks. That's the fucking, that's what this boils down to, is like we just have to like say something bad about games or something like that's like deeply personal to like be heard.
Dude, you know what really sucks?
What the fuck?
I feel like this sounds like, I don't know, this sounds bad. I have like some of like the best games criticism and like writing I've written recently has been like, or not that I've written, but what I've read is in like games academia. I think like a lot of the good games writers just fucking left to go like work in academia, because I've like read more interesting stuff and interesting thoughts about games in that space, which I think is like conducive to like not being a fucking witch hunt. I mean, maybe some areas of academia are that, but like at least like game studies, like I know friend of the show Cameron Kunzelman runs Game Study Buddies. Some of the stuff they talk about in those books is like actually very compelling stuff. It's like interesting ways to think and talk about games that's outside of the framework of hot takes. And that is like really nice, because I get like so little of any of that anymore. Reading like most sort of games publication stuff, I think mostly for me it's like finding out what's coming out or whatever. And I'm like, you know, the errant piece from like Rock Paper Shotgun might be sort of interesting as written or something, but other than that, like it's very rare that I'm like reading like a compelling thought or like framework of talking about how to think about games inside the context of what we describe as like games journalism. Um, so I don't know. That's something that I definitely notice more as I'm reading more like games study stuff, like slightly more academic-y things to get that sort of fix, and not looking so much to games journalism for that space. And like, I mean, even like people like Cameron are, I guess he was been in academia, but he was like writing for these sites that we were talking about, doing the work that we're talking about, and now he's like writing a game studies book, which I feel like is sort of mirroring or echoing what I'm talking about. Of those writers are going to this other place where they're like, I have these like, and like honestly, if we're like truthful with ourselves, like how many people who are writing about games are like not someone who's like inside like a sociological or like sort of philosophy adjacent PhD or master's program doing something else and writing about games on the side. Like they're already academic people who are writing these
That's what I was
academic pieces that are trying to peddle them to some other gamer audience where it's not going to be received well, but they don't care because in 2 years they're going to go write a piece that gets published in like an academic journal that is actually more compelling.
But I mean, that's the thing. Like, it has been like that for a while too. But like, they would just run that in a publication under like the title, like why this game's this was this. You know,
they'd have a hot take title for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know where it's gonna go from here. Honestly, I'm just like.
I mean, shout out to the people on YouTube. Some people on YouTube are doing like interesting and compelling video essay work, which seems like the audiences for those things find those things more palatable.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because even like back when I was like doing game show, like on the PBS thing, like our audience fucking hated us, like for saying all the same things that all these other video essay people are saying now. They're just doing it in sort of a nicer format. And I think that like the ship has been steered enough where people are receiving it there. But like some people just fucking lurk on Twitter and just like talk shit about Kotaku no matter what piece they put up, just because they're like hating on Kotaku. And it's like, that sucks. You know?
Haters gonna hate.
You got any other 4 thoughts 4 years?
Not really. I mean, I just want to have good conversation about games and other stuff.
The
And
Discord, man. That's the thing.
no, I know. A lot of good conversation is probably happening on Discords, to be honest with you, as it is on ours. But if there's any ways, listener, that you can think of, like us having better conversations about games that meet people where they kind of are, hit us up. Let us know, like, if you have any ideas about that stuff, because we think we do, and we want to pursue it, and we're on the way there. But it all feels like experimentation right now, and we're just kind of doing our thing. This feels like an easy experiment for us to do in the video podcast format, because we are critical, but we are on video here, and I think we have compelling kind of visual stuff to reach across to a different audience. But let us know if there's any other ways. I have some ideas, but if you have any ideas, let us know. Let's address some of the topics that we got here.
I can answer this first question we got. I'm Steven on the Discord. He says, so we were on the Discord and we were talking about, someone was calling out someone on Twitter about, it was about this, like, wasn't like Blue Haven or something, some studio where this guy has this game that like looked like a Kojima game or something. Did you follow this?
I did not. I saw that
something
was happening, and I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna do
yeah,
this.
Just don't. I don't. Yeah, I've like, yeah. So basically, I think what the gist of what happened was that, this guy announced this game at like E3 or whatever, and then like the fucking Kojima people went insane, or Kojima fans went insane because they thought that it was like a sort of Kojima move where he founded like a fake news studio to secretly announce the next Metal Gear or something, that it was like part of his ARG. And then this like games journalist on Twitter, I guess like after the fact, was like talking about how people like kind of like giving them like a wrist slap, being like, oh, no, you shouldn't do this thing. And then someone was like in the comments being like, hey, you were the person who was making people think that this thing was this thing. And so I had made this comment on Discord where I said, maybe one day critics will be able to recognize that they are a primary force in creating the gamer base they all hate.
Because the game journalist was making it sound like maybe it was a Kojima thing, right?
Yes. Yeah, basically boosting the theory.
And then when it turned out bad, that person got like piled on.
No, they piled on other people saying, why did you think this?
Oh, when they're the one who was like,
yes,
saying it was potentially legit. Oh,
yes. So I said in response to this on the Discord, maybe one day critics will be able to recognize that they are a primary force in creating the gamer base they all hate, but today is not that day. And Steven asked if I could expand on that comment, which I definitely made somewhat flippantly, but I think I would still stand by. I think it's hard. I think it can be hard to see what I'm talking about with that comment. I think that like gamers don't exist in a vacuum. I think it's important to remember. The way like a capital G gamer exists is that they're like fed a stream of information about games, and they get excited about them, and read more about those games. And then when those games inevitably don't meet their whatever expectations, they then get mad and like lash out. That's like the cycle of being a gamer. People who are at the center of this thing are like traditional like games journalist people. I'm not saying like anyone specifically, but the function of games journalism in large part is to like listen to what the game industry is saying and then repeat those things to other people so that they can hear what the game industry has to say. You are also incentivized based on the price structures of how these things are funded, that you want to publish more content that gets more views because you're largely driven by ad revenue. So if something is doing well, you will likely over-index on that to continue pushing those things. AKA, if big game X is coming out soon and you are getting traction on that thing, you will then probably publish more articles about that thing. So it becomes a cycle where people are reading your stuff and getting more excited and giving you views. So you're pushing more stuff that are getting them excited to want to read more stuff. And it's this like cycle of hype that happens. And then when it breaks or whatever, everyone gets mad at everything. And I think that like it is hard to conceive a model that is not this, but I think that this cycle is largely what creates this sort of like fervid, that's not even a word, like sort of like rabid like gamer base, is because they're fed a
Fervent.
stream of fervent, yeah, they're fed a stream of articles and content that get them excited about stuff by the games critics who peddle them those things, in large part because it sustains their livelihood. And I think it's funny in these moments where game critics like lash out about like gamer behavior. And it's like, okay, listen, that person is definitely out of base, but also you've been feeding this person articles for the past 3 months that told them that this game was going to change their life. Like, I feel like there's some sense of culpability there that has to be owned up to be like, oh, maybe I'm part of the problem. And I feel like as soon as these things flip, games journalists, like this example we saw on Twitter, are so often to be like, whoa, didn't mean that. Like, it's this weird sort of like suspension,
And there's
or
like
like
just there's
juggling that
no
happens.
space to exist there. Like you have
Yeah.
no room to exist in that space. Like
Yeah.
we have these areas in video games that are like significant portions of a conversation where you simply cannot exist. Not just because of outside pressure, but because of inside pressure. And I'm going to use like specific names here because fuck it. But the example that I think of now, and we're like kind of so distant from it almost that it's kind of okay. But if you were a person who, okay, the year is 20 fucking 15, all right? And let's say you're on the internet and you see this video game video, and it's like you're critical of games, you consider yourself like an avid reader, you're knowledgeable about multiple things, you're not like, you're a pretty progressive person, and you see a video from Feminist Frequency. Okay, you click on the video and you have like pretty much positive thoughts, but you have like 5 criticisms of the video, and you're just like, this was kind of like base level, like, you know, feminist critique. Like, they didn't really dive that deep. I didn't think they made very compelling arguments. Blah, 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 blah. That's like a pretty normal opinion to have, right? That's not that like wild of an opinion to have, in my opinion, to look at a Feminist Frequency video, think, I didn't, it was pretty good, but it didn't go far enough. Some of its points were made on like grounds that I think were a bit shaky. There were some issues with like this, but yeah, I mean, it's good that you're talking about games through like a feminist lens overall. However, I had some issues with it, blah, blah, blah. Totally normal opinion to have. That was simply not a thing you could say on the internet for like even fucking now. Well, now it's like more okay, but for like years it was like you just simply could not say that. Not because there was some like gang of people who would like destroy you if you were to vocalize those opinions, but because like that means you're a fucking gamergator straight up. Like, you would rather be on one person's side, and like it's more helpful to the conversation right now to like not be saying that type of shit,
Right.
than to like be a hater, or like the person playing devil's advocate. It was almost as if you were to say anything contrary to the video, even if it was like a mild critique, you were like the asshole devil's advocate person for like years. And it feels like that's just like the general sphere of video game conversation, where there's like, you're either here or you're here, and there's like so much space in the middle that you simply cannot occupy, or else you're like on the opposite side, and that is a critical failing of the that's like kind of what I'm talking about when it comes to like the quote conversation, like the failure of these conversations. And I think like when you think about how big that space is and how big that space still is, we need ways to be able to say these kind of things without like being classified as like the asshole. Because I think when you start digging into those details, that's when things get interesting, and that's when you start really having the conversations that change people's minds. And that's where the kind of work that at the time I was like, I saw Gia Tolentino as being the like model for that kind of discussion, that I would have loved to have video games go to that space. But then stuff happened with Gia. She hasn't been seen online for over a year or whatever the fuck. She kind of dipped after her book. But yeah, man, just think about that space in between and how you can occupy that space without being the dick.
I think that's what's so hard, is that you say anything that gets you. Also, we're like circling what sounds like we're like scared of cancel culture. I think that's like not what we're trying to say. I think it's specifically just talking about the nuance that does not exist in talking about video games, where either like basically unless you fully love a video game, you will get a hate mob against you. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about like, I can't say that like I had like a, I don't know,
the other
something
thing, the other like,
racist or
I
whatever.
think the
It's
other
not like about that.
big difference between what I'm talking about and quote cancel culture as currently discussed is the fact that like a lot of the pressure comes internally. Like if I ever had a critique of a feminist frequency video, I wouldn't be like necessarily afraid of talking about it because of backlash from someone exterior to me, but because like it does not feel helpful to put out the opposite, to start to be voicing the opposite opinion in a public forum. That feels like more of the issue to me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where like when it's like, especially in the midst of Gamergate, like, yeah, am I gonna be that fucking guy? Hell no. Not because I'm afraid of like that the women are gonna think I'm a sexist or that I'm gonna get canceled, but because like it's not constructive at all, considering the climate, you know, and where the conversation currently stands. And I think it's that way for a lot of people, right?
I think it's just hard to figure out what's the constructive line right now for like, I think understanding that there's like real problems with like the models of games criticism, but like you don't want to like it's like hard to talk about that because the hate mob will like magnetize to you and say like, well, you're now my champion because you're someone who's said what I'm
Exactly.
thinking, and you're like, I'm not saying that. Like,
Yeah.
like fuck off.
And then
like,
all of a sudden it's like
saying.
you get YouTube monetized and you're like, maybe I am saying that, bro. All right, for that much money I am saying that. Fuck it. You know, like
Yeah.
I feel like that's definitely happened to some people where they're like, I'm not trying to be YouTube says they're gonna give me that. Okay.
I guess I'm gonna be the asshole.
I'm gonna get that fucking mainstream right wing money, baby. Let's go.
Yeah. Anyways, I think to go back to the question, I think Steven, that's sort of what I'm talking about a little bit, is that I think that there's an unproductive cycle that exists where specifically how a critic or like a games journalist right now exists between games companies and game players that makes them ripe for producing this feedback cycle where they are inevitably fueling the thing that like is not productive, I think, for criticism. And I don't know how that changes because like that's like, I don't know if the whole industry is built on that. So I don't know. I have the next question's fun. Let's go to a fun question. If you were developing a beginner's list of games to help students understand game design / narrative design, what would you include? Choose like, I don't know, what 2 games can you think of?
I have no clue, dude. Like, I don't even, what game design? What is that?
What is game design? Fucking
Tetris,
I mean, honestly, at Tetris.
I started playing
Super
Tetris
Mario
Effect last
1.
week, and I was just like, this game is
Dude,
perfect.
Tetris Effect,
Dude.
it's so good.
Tetris
Especially
is a perfect game.
whoever shouted out in the Discord about how to change the camera default setting changed my fucking life. Because for so long I thought you had to zoom in at the start of every level, and they added a setting where you can set the camera. Life changer. I think Mario, honestly, get someone to play like Mario 1, but like play it and think about what's going on. I think that I don't know, the invisibility of those games is like very nice. Narrative design, like
Twine games. Honestly, like a good Twine game.
Games. Yeah.
Like just the simplicity of it. Disco Elysium. Promessa.
Promessa, yeah, I think like sort of the like walking simulator stuff. I mean, like Dear Esther, What Remains of Edith Finch, if they have access to those things. I think that those are definitely really good.
Just stuff
options.
that like kind of pushes the boundaries of what it can be, right? Because I think you can take a pretty like base level game. You know, I mean, fucking Donkey Kong, man. That's like the video game story. You're fucking taking the princess to the next floor.
If people are like playing like Fortnite or like Among Us, like there's ways to talk about those games from like I mean, those games aren't really a narrative perspective. I think there's also a lot of discussion about what video game narrative means. So there's different formats there. But for game design, like talking about what people are playing, saying like every game is designed, you know, it doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else we got?
Are loot boxes gambling? Yes. But this is one of these points. Loot boxes are an issue, but like also there are a lot of issues for a lot of the reasons that like what the gamer audience latched onto is like not the reasons to get mad about loot boxes. But like, I don't know. Loot like hashtag gambling is like you
that
can't just
episode.
jump into a hashtag. That was an episode. I remember that episode.
I got pissed. I had a lot more fire in my belly in 2017. We'll say that. I was living in New York.
Hashtag gambling. Moved to LA and chilled out.
Yeah, man. California sunshine got to me.
All right, last question. We're at 2.5 hours too, so Jesus Christ. What video game character awakened your sensual side?
All of them.
Every character.
I love video games.
Listen, I talked about Ocarina of Time, Princess Rudo, babe, total babe.
I feel like there's definitely something that I'm like not thinking of. Lulu from Final Fantasy X. Fucking anyone in Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Everyone there is hot.
Pretty much, yeah. I think we're running out of steam here.
We're running out of steam. That's the hundo. We made it to basically 2.5 hours.
Yeah, and man, I could really talk about this stuff, the nuance thing, really, for a long time, because it's that space, man. It's that fucking space. I want to be in that space. You know where?
The issue is that the people who get like mad, like the people who like are railing against like critics, like that's not a sustained audience. Those people like get mad once and then fucking move on with their life. But something is happening where new people are like always coming in, so no one's actually engaged with the conversation.
Yeah, it's not a sustainable audience.
No one on that side is sustained, right? Like they don't fucking care. That's what makes it hard, is that like you try to tell one person about how like maybe that they're like wrong about video games, and by the time they're like, oh, I don't care about video games anymore, I like play basketball or something. And you're like, yeah, well, you sent me death threats 2 years ago, so like, are you
You
gonna do
know
anything about
what
that?
episode I think we really got there? And I feel like I just want to do more episodes like this is the fucking Ghost of Tsushima episode. Like I would send that shit. I'm like so proud of that episode.
I don't know if I was there for that episode.
No, you weren't.
Oh man, you're like the best one. No Kyle.
But I mean, not every episode has to be that, obviously. But as far as like in how it was realized, like we literally had fucking, it was me, Emma Kidwell, who's half Japanese, and then we had fucking Katie, who like kind of grew up in like, you know, she has like is very close family wise with like Asian culture because she has like family members who are Asian as well. I don't want to like be talking about her family life, but just know that that's her situation. And then Matt Kim, who's Korean, and we're all talking about like our experiences as Asian Americans and like different types and like being close or somewhat far away from Japanese culture. And we really delved deep into like Asian Americanness through the microcosm of Ghost of Tsushima, while also like not saying that the game is like shit because it has some bad representation in there, which is like a very, very thin line to cross. And it got awkward at times, like, because that's just how this stuff works. But in a way that I think is like, it's a little bit fucking messy to talk about this shit. But when you're with people who are like actually willing to get their hands dirty and talking about this stuff, it's really constructive. And we got to some places where I was just like, it felt like therapeutic to me to be talking about these things and like to hear that other people have had similar experiences.
That's like sort of the whole like meaning of like what a safe space is actually meant to be, is like, hey, we're about to like talk about this stuff and it's going to be like messy and weird, but we're going to like work through it together. And like you're not going to, it's going to be messy, and not because like I'm about to shit on you or something, but it's like,
Yeah.
this is a space to explore this thing. Like we're people who want to talk about an idea. I think that what gets polluted about that sort of notion of like discourse and sort of like veers towards like both sidesism is that you have people entering into spaces that are bad faith actors, right? You get like gamers just want to get mad at Kotaku. They don't want to have a discussion.
Yeah.
They're like, you can't have a space to like talk with nuance about like Ghost of Tsushima or like literally any other fucking video game, because they're all fucked up in different ways, that like has this sort of magic circle is a cursed word in games, but this sort of space around it to say like, let's actually talk about what this is going on, and like let's like be critical and like a critic's eye about how we're doing this and what we're talking about, and like maybe get somewhere and like have an interesting discussion about this thing that's not just like gameplay is a 7 out of 10 and graphics 8 out of 10, Kurosawa mode Akira out of 10, some like bullshit like that.
Well, it's like to have a truly safe space, like you need to have people who are willing to engage in good faith, which I think that's the big problem, is that like that's so hard to find sometimes. And like I think in this situation, like it really helped with us because like, the three of us have never gotten together and talked about like, our fucking heritage. Like it never even really came up in conversation that like, oh, hey, we're all, Asian reporters, like before this or anything like that, but it really provided a lot of context in that situation. And I just feel very confident in that episode. Obviously there's so many more episodes of Bad End that I really feel like we've done just great work, just things that we've done. We got fucking Dive on and fucking Storefront Church on the podcast. We got fucking Soleil Ho. Like we've gotten people in the video game scene like who we really, really respect, like fucking Austin Walker, Tim Rogers, like people who are doing great work. And, I don't know, Abby Russell, like just any number of people. Thanks to anyone who's come on this show before, like, and let us know if there's anyone else that you think would be great for the show. But it's been 100 episodes. I have, think about how much this show has changed over that amount of time. and I think it can change even more. And I want to do good things. I want to do cool things, and I think that we can. I think we're uniquely positioned to do cool shit. And
All right.
yeah, here's to the next 100.
You want to sign it off?
Yeah. Here's the next 100. We are Bad End Podcast. Thank you so much for listening and following us on this journey. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Hope we didn't get into any territory that was too messed up. Yeah. You can find us on Twitter at Bad End Podcast. Email us at badendpod@gmail.com. We invite you to contribute to our Patreon at patreon.com/badend. Follow any of our friend websites, part of Superculture. You got Bullet Points. You got Heterotopias. You got fucking Funland. You got Superculture Review. Idea of Evil Season 2. And yeah. Did I say Funland? I said Funland. Yeah. We'll talk to you in a couple weeks, folks. Thanks for joining.
See you.